merchant to upgrade point of sale to support this. I think there will be room for some question and answers at the end. The agenda that I want to cover today really is what is EMV and what is NFC. So collectively I'll refer to that as chip-based technology. The status of the U.S. migration, touch points on the impact EMV will have on our payments infrastructure in the United States. I think it's equally importantly to understand what EMV is not and to ensure everybody understands what it solves for over time and when will it become relevant to the type of business that you have. There's a couple of implementation models that are available in the market today, and then there's some additional appendix information. I won't go over those slides, but it tells you a little bit about what the 4 card brands that are pushing this initiative in the United States, what their timelines look like. At the end of the presentation, there's also some slides about digital wallets, specifically Apple Pay. And I'll talk a little bit about that when we get to that section as well. So let's start out with what is EMV and what is NFC. So EMV really is just an acronym, EuroPay, MasterCard, Visa. That's the 3 founding organizations that develop chip card standards for payment processing. And basically it helps ensure a security framework around card transactions that occur in a face-to-face environment that does not occur or does not apply, to transactions that occur in a card not present environment. We are one of the slower or last major countries in the world to move towards a chip technology infrastructure for payment processing. Some of the other places in the world it's known as chip and PIN, some places it's chip and signature, but it's all the same, and it's all based on the same technology created by the 3 entities at the top of this slide. NFC, on the other hand, is a flavor of EMV. NFC stands for Near Field Communications. Essentially, it's contactless EMV. So when you think about EMV, just that particular acronym, picture a card in your hand that has a chip in it that talks to the point of sale. NFC is more of contactless, where in the old days or in previous years you've had cards that had a chip that you could wave in front of a point of sale that supports the contactless technology. I think the way you would really think about NFC as we go forward is wallets in your phone. Apple Pay as an example. Google Wallet is another example, and Samsung is working towards a wallet technology as well. So they are the same. One is just the card is actually physically inserted into the point of sale, and the other is the phone or the card, whichever the case may be, is waved above the point of sale if the point of sale can handle the NFC technology. So chip card basics. Basically, it's a piece of plastic containing an integrated circuit. The chip is powered by the card reader and relies on that reader to function. So as the card is inserted into the point of sale, it's no longer a magstripe swipe process to initiate a transaction. You actually have to insert your card into a reader on the point of sale, leave it there for the duration of the transaction, and then as the receipt prints, remove the card and take your receipt and walk out the door with the goods or services that you purchased. Cards communicate with that terminal over the contact plate or inside the terminal, and there is an interaction between the card and the point of sale that is occurring. They also have the capability of creating via that radio frequency, the tap to pay, mostly what you'll see, and that's the Apple Pay initiative with mobile. And then there are certain types of cards that you can do contact or contactless, and it's all dependent upon what the point of sale capabilities are. A little bit about the U.S. migration. As I mentioned earlier, we are one of the last organized nations, or industrialized nations, I guess is a better way to put that has moved towards chip technology. Processors had a directive by MasterCard, Visa, Amex, and Discover to enable chip card processing in April of 2013. That just means that the processors had to make sure their systems could handle chip if there was a point-of-sale solution capable of sending a chip transaction through. By and large, that has occurred. That's done. The processors have met that deadline. There's a lot of work yet to be done on point-of-sale solutions that can handle chip, and that is what we are, as an organization, are working on right now. That will continue as we move forward, and everything that we develop moving forward across this industry will be chip capable from this day forward. According to payments.com, and these are a little bit of moving targets, there's a lot of information in the market about how many cards are in the market, how many of the cards in market have been issued with chip, and what's the forecast look like for this year and years to come. In America, there's about 1 billion cards, maybe a little bit more, in use in the country across all of the states, and the issuers have put in the pockets and wallets of the consumers. By the end of 2015, the liability shift, or in October of 2015, you're going to have a liability shift occur, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward with the presentation. But at current trend, roughly 20 to 30% of the cards issued by the end of this year will be chip capable. That means 70 to 80% will still be traditional mag stripe. And I think another thing that you need to understand about a chip-capable card is it doesn't mean it can't work in a mag stripe point of sale. All cards that are reissued that have chip capabilities will also still contain the ability or enable the ability for mag stripe card processing as well. So that's something to keep in mind. Come October, if you haven't had the opportunity to upgrade, it doesn't mean you can't process. You still will be able to. Merchants are beginning to invest in hardware upgrades, and it does take an upgrade to handle the new technologies. And there is an EMV migration forum actively working on how do we promote knowledge and understanding of the importance of this initiative in the country. That knowledge and understanding needs to go across consumers. It needs to go across merchants as well, because without the two, there's a disconnect out there. And that's part of what we're here today, is to give you an understanding of where things are and where things are going. Transfers, by the way, is a member of this EMV Migration Forum, and we do attend the meetings as often as they are scheduled. So the first thing you got to think about is what will it require? So issuing and acquiring processors like TransFirst and our competitors in the market, we all have to upgrade our systems to handle a different way of processing transactions. It's a pretty big investment, and it's a pretty comprehensive overhaul of our systems environments. As a merchant, you have to upgrade your point of sale. Traditional mag stripe technology, although it still works and the chip cards can still be used in that point of sale through a normal swipe process, in order to take advantage of the chip card benefits that will be available later this year, you do need new hardware and or software to make sure that you're capable of processing a chip card transaction versus just a typical mag stripe. And it's also going to change the traditional process that we as consumers are used to when we make a purchase. Today we walk up to a point of sale. We either hand our card to the person at the other side of the counter, or in many retail environments, we swipe our own card through a customer-facing device. The larger retailers have typically moved to those customer-facing devices. The smaller retailers have typically maintained the model where we hand our card over to the salesperson that is an employee of the merchant. That will change, because now when you have a chip card that is presented at a chip terminal, both conditions have to be present. If the terminal is capable of processing a chip card and the card has the chip in it, you can try to do a magnetic stripe transaction, but the terminal will tell you that this card has a chip in it and it must be inserted into the chip reader in order to do the transaction. If the terminal has not been upgraded and is still only capable of mag stripe, the mag stripe function will work. That's the key to ensuring that there's not a massive interruption in commerce come October this year when this liability shift occurs. So in the model where the chip card and the terminal are both capable of EMV processing, the card will be inserted into the chip reader and it will be left there. And if you try to remove it during the transaction, first off, there's little pinchers in the terminal that make it difficult to remove. Not impossible, but difficult. You have to leave it there for the duration of the transaction. When the receipt prints on the terminal, that's when the little pinchers release and you can remove the card hand the receipt and the card back to the consumer so they can walk out the door with what they've purchased. That's the big change that consumers are going to have to get used to. What we're hoping, we know it's going to happen as an organization. We've seen it happen in other countries. There's going to be the first time somebody has this occur to them as a new card holder. You get a reissued card, has a chip in it. You walk up to a terminal that's capable. Do you run the risk of not knowing the different behavior necessary and walking out of the store with your card? We're hoping that doesn't happen. We know that it will. It'll happen to a consumer once before they realize, oh, this is different than what we used to do yesterday, and they probably won't let it happen again. But it's something to keep in mind. What EMV and NFC is not is equally important as what it is. So a lot of talk about security and compliance on PCI and data theft, card compromises that have occurred in the big retailers. What does EMV work or to solve, and what doesn't it solve? So the first thing you have to keep in mind is it's not the silver bullet that says if you have an EMV terminal, you're automatically PCI compliant, because PCI compliance really encompasses a variety of activities that occur associated with card processing and the storage of transactions that have occurred. It's a big piece of it, but it's not all of it. So the primary account number of the card and the track data, if used in either a magstripe or a chip-based transaction, they're still available to be stolen if the cyber criminal has found a way to hack into a particular point-of-sale environment. What makes it more secure is on an upcoming slide. I'll talk about how the chip interaction and the terminal work to prevent that card, that stolen card data, from being used to create a fake plastic, also known as a white plastic or a counterfeit card, where that fraud begins to perpetrate. The other thing to keep in mind is this EMV NFC solution is not a cure-all for all chargebacks. The programs put in place by the associations, and those associations are MasterCard, Visa, Amex, and Discover, will help reduce the incidence of counterfeit card-related fraud, but not all the other types of chargebacks that may or may not occur in the market. And on the next slide, we'll show you what I mean by that. EMV reduces the potential for the following chargeback codes. So in the Visa world, it's counterfeit, it's fraud card present, and fraud merchant performance. In MasterCard, there's a few others that are out there. But those are, in Visa, there's 3. In MasterCard, there's 5. Amex and Discover, I didn't list them on here, but they have very similar chargeback reasons. They're protected under an EMV scenario. There's literally hundreds of additional types of chargebacks that can occur. And I just wanted to be very clear, these are the chargebacks that you gain protection against, and the others are not impacted at all by EMV. So the liability shift. Basically, what does the liability shift mean is that the party responsible for the chip transaction not occurring, and by party I mean either the card holder making the purchase or the merchant who is selling whatever is being sold, whichever of those two entities is not chip capable. I don't have a chip card, but the merchant has the chip terminal. The liability for counterfeit fraud falls on that entity. So although it's not you, the card holder, that pays for counterfeit fraud, it's actually your issuing bank. If the merchant upgrades the terminal but the bank hasn't issued you a chip card, your bank eats counterfeit fraud. If your bank has issued you a chip card but the merchant hasn't upgraded the point of sale and counterfeit fraud chargebacks occur, the merchant will then eat that chargeback. That's the liability shift, because today in the market, as long as you as a merchant do what you're supposed to do, swipe the card or close your batch on a daily basis, ensure that you get the customer signature on a receipt if it's a card present transaction, compare the signature to the back of the card. If you do those things, in theory you're not liable for a counterfeit card being used at your merchant establishment. That will change in October if you don't upgrade to chip. Now, what I would do as a merchant is I would look at my chargebacks that I get on any given year, understand how many do I get, And do they fall into the reason codes that I showed on this particular slide? And if you have a large number that may or may not fall into this type of a reason code, then you're more likely to want to upgrade sooner rather than later. If you don't get these kinds of chargebacks today, and in many cases these are pretty obscure in the smaller merchant environment, they are pretty commonplace in a large where you're more of an anonymous consumer. Those are the kinds of considerations to take into account as you're thinking about what do I need to do as a merchant to protect myself in the future. Liability shift also applies to face-to-face transactions only. So if you sell card not present, mail order, phone order, e-commerce, those places where the consumer's not standing in front of you with a card that is either handed over to you or swiped through their point of sale, you don't, if that is your primary or only means of selling, if you're an online retailer, for example, EMV is completely non-applicable to you. It's applicable to face-to-face transactions when you and the merchant are in the same environment, same store, same retail location, and you are using your card physically at the point of sale. So that's another important distinguishing fact that you need to understand as you think about how this impacts you. So how does the chip then reduce the counterfeit fraud? So when an EMV card is presented at a terminal that's capable of reading that chip on the card, the terminal prompts it to be inserted into the chip reader versus swiped through the magstripe reader. And that means that the chip on the card and the terminal are performing an interaction between the two of them, and they're doing a risk assessment of what are we looking at in this particular transaction. There is a dynamic component that changes with every single authorization that occurs with chip. When you think about what happens with magstripe, you swipe your card through the reader. It's always the exact same data that is being read by the terminal and transmitted up to the processor to get that authorization back so that you know it's good to let the customer walk out of the door with whatever it is they purchased. In the chip world, there's a dynamic component in that authorization that only the card and the issuer of that card can decrypt or understand whether it's the right dynamic value or not. That's how you prevent stolen card data in a chip world from being reused when it becomes part of a white plastic or a counterfeit piece of plastic, because the counterfeit piece of plastic would never know, unless it was just a very random lucky guess on a very large number of possibilities out there, that they actually hit this exact same value. Very, very unlikely. So the white plastic would never create the same dynamic value that the issuer is expecting from the card being used for that transaction. So that is how chip basically protects against counterfeit fraud at the point of sale. But as you can, I mentioned earlier, as you think about something where it's online, there is no interaction of that chip in the card and the point of sale when you're making an e-commerce purchase or when you're calling up to buy something over the phone. And as a result of that, that's why EMV is not applicable to the card not present environment. When will it matter to your business is a question that you really need to think about, and it's kind of where I've been leading up to with this presentation so far. So what I would look at is the following types of questions as a merchant. What type of merchandise do you sell? Do you sell something that can be monetized, which is really what the purpose is for counterfeit white plastics? The thieves that deal in that kind of activity are really looking for use of somebody else's credit card number to buy something that they can sell to somebody and make money. It's all about the thieves making money. So what kind of merchandise do you sell? Do you sell liquor? Do you sell electronics? Do you sell jewelry? Do you sell, or on the flip side, are you selling a service? The more likely that you're going to want to upgrade will be a big, answering that question will be a big dependency on how you answer that question. The second most important thing to think about is how well do you know your customer? So if you're an anonymous customer that walks into a very large national retail chain, they don't know who you are, and they don't know that the card that you're using by looking at you is not your card. How However, if you know your customer well, you have an ongoing relationship with them, when they walk into your door, you know them by name, or you have their demographic and information about them on file, then you're less, if it's the latter, you're less likely to be impacted by this. If you're a merchant where you don't know your customer at all, then you're more likely to want to take advantage of an upgrade of your point of sale sooner rather than later. At the end of the day, everybody's going to want to do this. It's really a matter of how quickly and how important is it for you to do so this year right away. Do you have one or more locations in geographic markets where banks have begun issuing chip cards? So that will, over time, become an answer of yes over time. Right now, it's certain markets where tourism is more prominent than not. Because of the prominence of chip transaction processing in other countries, if the location that you are selling your goods or services is also a location where a lot of people from overseas visit, then you're likely to experience chip cards already today. You just don't know it because they work in your magstripe devices. So something to think about. But again, as issuers begin to reissue their cards, and the strategy is more likely to be the normal reissue cycle versus a mass mailing of new cards this year. So a normal reissue cycle typically is a 3-year window. Where do you reside, and where's the real estate that you sell out of? How many counterfeit chargebacks do you receive each year? Back to those reason codes that were on the previous slide. And then what type of point-of-sale system do you have? All of those things combined kind of set the stage for, do I need to do this right now and make sure I'm good before October, or is it something that I can budget and figure out how to integrate into my point of sale with a little bit less urgency based on how you would answer these questions. So the implementation options then, there's two primary. There's more than two, but the two primary ones that I want to make sure you understand, because they're going to be the most common, are listed on this slide. If you have a countertop, excuse me, if you have a countertop or a wireless terminal, it's really very simple. Most likely you're going to need to buy a new device. If you haven't bought something within the last year, 2 years or so, the likelihood of that device being capable of supporting this new technology is pretty slim. It's not without exception. There are some that do, but I think, the first question would be, does my device have the capability of a card being inserted into a chip slot? You just have to look at it and see if there's a chip slot on there, or if there's just a magstripe reader. So you may or may not need to buy a new terminal, but guarantee you that you will need to download it with new software, even if you have a terminal that's capable of chips. So not all of the applications that reside inside those terminals are certified for this technology yet. A lot of that is still in flux, in flight. It's happening right now as we speak, and is expected to be released throughout this year for devices like Ingenico or Verifone, Equinox. There's other brands out there as well, PAX, Deja Vu. There's just a variety of different devices, and each of those manufacturers is responsible for certifying their applications for this new technology. If you have a more complex integrated point of sale, what we recommend is more of what we call a semi-integrated processing option. Another way to think of it is a pre-certified option, and that one is easier to show than explain. And on this slide, it kind of illustrates the processing model of how that would work. In today's world without chip, you have a point-of-sale system, a tablet or an iPad-based point-of-sale, or a PC-based point-of-sale. They really kind of function the same way today. The way that works today is you've got a point-of-sale application that brings up whatever the amount due is. There's a means in which you swipe a card through the device or through the card reader. It sends that transaction through your point-of-sale application to TransFirst or other processor data centers. So basically what you've got there is a model where the card data is running through your system to get authorized and return a response to you. With the semi-integrated or pre-certified, as we're maybe going to rename this, but what happens is it reverses the transaction flow. you still use your point-of-sale system to ring up the amount due. What are they buying? How much does it cost? Is there tax associated with it? Any discounts, etc.? But when you press the Pay Now button and the choice of, or the tender type of choice is credit, basically what happens is step 2 occurs as illustrated on this diagram. The point of sale basically through a simple integration talks to a device. In this case, we're showing a Verifone device. It could be an Ingenico device as well. I just use this for illustrative purposes. But it says, I need $100 on a credit type transaction. Can you go get it for me? So that the point of sale simply sends a message to the terminal and says, go get me whatever the amount is due, $100. From there, the terminal sends the transaction through the normal process as it does today. It could be magstripe, it could be chip, it could be NFC, the wallet scenario that I talked about. Doesn't matter because that's what this device will handle. And then when the response comes back, all the way through step 6 and 7, is the device will get the response saying it was approved. It will send truncated data back to your point of sale, and it will say, I got your $100. It was on a Visa card. It ended in 2314. The auth code was A12345. It was swiped, or it was chip and signature, or it was chip and pin, whatever the method of validating the authorization was. What that does is it takes your point of sale out of the need for this continuous certification cycle, and it puts the burden of that on the app that resides in this point of sale device. It also has a secondary and equally is important benefit, and that is that it puts kind of a firewall, if you will, between your point of sale and where card data resides. So your point of sale under this model would never touch full true card data. It would touch truncated card data because that response back on step 7 will give you what you need to print your receipt, to log the transaction for reporting purposes, everything you do today, but it's not real card data. Therefore, you've just put a wedge between the terminal and your point of sale, and it makes compliance with PCI easier as well. So it solves a lot of different scenarios for you if that's the type of point of sale that you use. If you have a countertop, you just basically take this left-hand most piece of this screen off, and you're just running your point of sale terminal like you would today, and it does all those things. So really, it kind of leverages the same model. It's just how you integrate it into your point of sale that you use for selling your goods and services. A little bit recap on this one. Why go that model if you are running an integrated point-of-sale solution? It has the potential to eliminate a PA-DSS certification, offers the largest reduction on your PCI scope, and simplifies that annual process that you have to go through to certify and attest that you are compliant and that you're not doing things with card data you're not supposed to. Card swiped and key entered transactions are all very secure this way. The peripherals that are used are hardened, locked down, secure devices. Malware that is the cause of most of the card data breaches in the world today cannot install itself on those terminals because they're digitally signed with a processor like us, Transversed, and if the digital signature of whatever is trying to install on those devices doesn't match, it can't install. So malware, although I never say never, it's very, very challenging to get malware on a point-of-sale device. Whereas if you, on your point-of-sale on your PC, if you visit the wrong website, you could get infected with malware, which could then be sending card data somewhere else, and that's what we're all collectively working to avoid. The steps for implementation then is really just trying to digest what I've covered here today. And then put together a plan. What is it going to take for you to get there? What kind of point-of-sale solution do you have? And what is available to you? Talk to your processor, talk to your relationship team that supports your business, and just start to put together your steps from step 1 through I'm ready and I can now take chip cards. Remember that it's more than just hardware and software upgrades. It's also a change in educating the people in your merchant environment that take the payment, that there is a change going to occur on how that payment will be processed once chip cards start walking into your door and the consumer hands them over to you. So it's hardware, software, training, all of the different steps that are going to be required. Just start to gather and define that. And then between now and whenever it makes sense for you, work towards getting to that state. And you know, over time, we as an industry will all get there. There's a few slides here that when you download this presentation later, you'll be able to read. I'm not going to go through them. I will just kind of show you real quickly what each one shows. Basically, it's the timeline of events on when certain occurrences for chip and liability shift and impacts and benefits to you as a merchant, when they begin, from past through present, or excuse me, past through future, what everything is going to look like. So you've got Visa and Interlink, you've got MasterCard and Maestro, you've got the American Express side of the house and what their expectations are, as well as Discover and the Pulse network. The other PIN debit networks are kind of falling in line with what Interlink and Maestro and Pulse are doing. But they've got work to do as well, and so this is not something that's going to happen overnight. It will take time, and that's the important thing to understand as well. Now, it looks like we got a little bit of time because one of the things I also wanted to point out or to cover today is digital wallets. When you think about digital wallets, and the primary one that is most recently announced and everybody's kind of got their backing behind right now is Apple Pay. It came out last October. Actually, in was either October or early November, it became something that, based on what your point of sale is at your merchant location, you could actually use to, or you could actually accept an Apple Pay based transaction. But essentially, the reason I'm throwing this in here is because Apple Pay and Google Wallet and other types of initiatives, they're simply leveraging the technology behind EMV and NFC. Apple Pay leverages NFC. Google Wallet leverages NFC. There was another one out there called SoftCard that just got acquired by Google Wallet. It also leveraged NFC. And by NFC, what I mean is there's a means in which you securely load your payment information into your phone. Your phone has the capability to, some of them, Apple iPhone 6s and some of the Android models out there as well, has the ability to communicate via NFC with point-of-sale equipment that is also capable of communicating with NFC. So it has to both be there. NFC on the phone, NFC on the point-of-sale. If you have all of that there, you can take Apple Pay. The implementation model that TransFirst will be putting out there is, as we certify devices, applications to run in your terminals that handles the chip technology, EMV, NFC, we will also be bringing to market Apple Pay, so that you get the package of all three with these upgrades that you're talking about. So Apple Pay is interesting. A little bit of fast facts about Apple Pay. From a transaction perspective, it leverages EMV and NFC. Talked about that already. It only works right now with MasterCard, Visa, and American Express. I was talking with Discover last week or the week before, and they're working on it as well. So eventually it will be the same four card brands that have the EMV mandate will also be Apple Pay capable as well. But your issuer also has to participate. So it will take time for the large number of issuing institutions in the United States to all get on board with this. Right now, it's the largest ones. Round 2 of issuer certification is coming up as well, so you're going to start to get down into the mid-tier issuers. In over time, I think the vast majority of issuers will probably get on board. But instead of card information, when you load your iPhone, in this case, with your card number, basically what you're doing is temporarily your phone is gathering your card number, it's sending it off to MasterCard, Visa, or American Express, and it's getting tokenized. And by tokenized, what I mean is it's really just substituting your real card number with another value that is not a card number and storing that token in your phone. So if you lose your phone under the Apple Pay model, you don't lose your card, which is a very nice feature. You just need a new token. The token is stored in a secure vault somewhere at either your issuer or at MasterCard, Visa, or American Express, And when a transaction occurs, it gets detokenized, but you don't have to worry about that as the phone holder. You don't have to worry about it as the merchant. It takes care of itself behind the scenes, downstream from how your point of sale is acting. And then privacy. Apple has stated they're not going to save transaction data. They're not going to sell this information out to marketing organizations. They're simply wanting to become a payment enabler via the mobile device versus a physical piece of plastic. It's easy to use, easy to make payments at a merchant that is capable of accepting. The data secure. Kind of talked about that already. There's two steps to an Apple Pay transaction, and again, once the EMV application certified in production and loaded into your terminal through TransFirst, this is something that will be available to you to take. But the first thing you have to do as the consumer is you have to load your card into your device, and it uses the I always forget what the term on my Apple phone is. Passbook. It uses the passbook piece of your Apple device for storage of this information. So basically, through the help of Apple and the App Store and their interaction with Visa, MasterCard, and American Express, you load your card into your phone. Then you get a token back, and that's the permanent storage thing in your phone, the permanent storage number. So that all takes place between the consumer and their issuer, doesn't have any merchant involvement whatsoever. That's the consumer's responsibility. Your interaction then as a merchant is when your point of sale is capable of this type of processing, a consumer will come in, they'll recognize that you're capable of this means of payment, and it's really very simple. You ring up the sale like you would today. The consumer simply takes their thumb or whatever fingerprint is loaded into their Apple device, holds it over the home button, and waves their phone over your point of sale. It's the combination of the biometric thumbprint and your point of sale talking to their phone that transfers that token as the payment to the point of sale. The point of sale just does its normal thing after that. And if there's, if you've ever done this, I've got an iPhone 6 myself. It's really pretty slick. You don't have to wake up your phone, plug in a passcode, open your wallet. You don't have to do any of that stuff. You just put your thumb on your home button and wave it over the phone. It's pretty slick, pretty simple. What Apple did was took the friction out of mobile payments by doing this process. That's the process for a card-present transaction. For card not present, it's a little different. If you have an e-commerce site that uses a browser to access www.isellmystuff.com, you're not capable of taking Apple Pay over your website if all you have is a browser-based website. Basically, what you have to do for Card Not Present and Apple Pay is you have to code your website to the Apple API. Basically, in a nutshell, you're writing an application that is downloadable off of iTunes App Store, so the consumer can go and load that on their phone, and then the interaction between your app, the consumer's phone, and your e-commerce site will enable you to take an Apple Pay transaction. So same thing happens. The phone, because you are logged on to the store's application via the phone, I'm going to use an example, and where Target has in-store, Target has a website, Target.com, and Target has an app that's available from the web App Store. If you log into Target on your phone via the app, you can pay with Apple Pay. If you log on to Target.com with your IE browser or Google Chrome or Safari or whatever, you cannot. And if you go to the store, you would have to use your phone over an NFC device, right? So you just need to think of it like that. Apple Pay is applicable to card-not-present merchants, but only if you write the application. And the other thing to keep in mind on Apple Pay, under the store model, you've got card-present type of interchange rates available. Under the app-based model, you have card-not-present interchange rates available to you, and that's defined by Apple and MasterCard, Visa, and American Express combined. So that concludes the slides that I wanted to cover today. I think at this stage we've got time for some questions. So
Sure
Casey, if
thing.
you want to take it back, and
Yeah,
we'll go
absolutely.
back in.
Absolutely. Our first question is, and sometimes people, participants may need a couple things reiterated. So if we happen to repeat something that was already presented, this is strictly for your benefit. How will EMV affect tableside transactions in a restaurant setting? Is a signature sufficient or is a PIN required?
That's a great question. In other countries, EMV, where PIN is more prominent, has changed the model for restaurants, and it basically moved the restaurants into what's called a pay-at-the-table scenario, where the device actually is brought to the table for the consumer to run the transaction with the server present, or a leave behind terminal sitting on the table. In America, I think what you're going to see, at least out of the gate, is that most issuers are probably going to go down the path of chip and signature, at least initially. I think what's going to happen is people are going to ease into this. People, or banks, I should go backwards. Banks are going to ease into this, probably come out of the market first with a chip card that doesn't require a PIN, and then over time start tightening up the bolts, if you will, and move towards certain types of transaction where they're going to want PINs. The inclusion or exclusion of a PIN to make the sale happen is totally the issuer's choice, as well as then what are the capabilities of the point of sale. So I think that the table side, or what I would call table service type of restaurant, has probably the biggest change coming at them over time as it relates to this type of technology.
Great. All right, the next question is, will this apply to or affect merchants that are completely web-based and use a payment gateway like PayPal for all transactions?
If you're 100% card not present or e-commerce, then EMV, NFC, and everything we just talked about does not apply, with one exception. If you want to take Apple Pay as a web-based merchant, and it's important to you to do that, you would have to write to the Apple application, right? The Apple API to support that. But as it relates to pieces of plastic and or everything else, none of this applies to card not present.
Okay. The next question is, will the processing fees be lower to reflect a better security?
Everybody asks that question. That's a good question. At this stage of the rollout of this program, the associations that set those interchange rates have not put in any kind of reduced interchange for merchants that process via chip versus sticking around with magstripe. Their benefit right now is the liability shift, and that, like I said earlier, it applies heavily in some merchant scenarios, and it applies kind of very, very lightly in other merchant scenarios. Who knows what the future holds, but what I can tell you right now is there's no interchange differential.
Okay. Can we keep a chip-enabled terminal behind our counter, or does the customer have to insert a chip card into the terminal themselves?
Either way, actually, and that's a really good question as well. And I think the answer to that changes over time on how you want to do it. There's nothing that says, you have to have something that faces the consumer. But if and when, and I think it's more a matter of when, not if, the issuers begin to request the consumer to enter the PIN, then you have to think about, do I want to be flipping my point-of-sale terminal towards the consumer to let them enter the PIN and then turning it back to me to finish the transaction? Or would it be better to put a PIN pad peripheral and attach it to my terminal so that it's always facing the consumer? Either model is acceptable. It's just a matter of, do you want that? Is it a big deal to you as a merchant to have to be flipping your terminal back and forth between you and whomever's making the payment at the other side of the counter?
Okay. The majority of my credit card transactions are card not present, so the one a day or so that happen face-to-face are entered into my gateway. I don't use a terminal for those. Will that be okay going forward?
You will still be able to use that gateway for the one or two or however many many face-to-face transactions you do. And you can swipe them through a card reader, or you can still key enter them through that gateway as well. And again, if you know those customers, the likelihood of them ever trying to defraud you is pretty slim, right? I always like the analogy of my dentist. I go to see him twice a year. I'm not going to use stolen card credentials to pay the copay for my dentist, because the next time I show up, he's probably going to give me an unnecessary root canal. Same thing for my hair stylist. I go once a month, and I'm not going to use somebody else's card that would result in him or her getting a charge back, because the next time I go in, probably going to get a really bad haircut, right? So if you know those customers, there's actually low demand or low need initially for you to upgrade, because the cards will still have the mag stripe. You can still swipe them through a card reader if you have that. You can still key enter them into your computer if that's the way you do business.
Okay. And how does this affect systems like the Square?
So that's a good question. So those mobile type solutions, Square is one. There's lots of them out there. Typically, they have what we like to call a dongle, but it's an audio jack-based card reader that is plugged into the audio jack of the phone, and that's how card data is swiped through, sent through the app to get authorized. Essentially, that app's going to need to be rewritten to handle new data elements and new transaction format behind the scenes. The merchant doesn't really know what happens behind the scenes, but basically, a card swipe occurs. It's formatted into a bunch of data elements in a string of however many there are, and it's sent up for authorization. That string of data elements has to change for a chip transaction, as well as that reader that's plugged into the audio jack has to be replaced, because the current ones are mag stripe only. And just like when you think about how a terminal works, you have to insert the card into the reader, leave it there. You got to do the same thing in mobile. You have to insert it into a new type of reader, leave it there, and do the transaction.
Okay. We had another restaurant question. What about tips in regards to restaurants? Currently, those that are run after the card holder has left.
Yeah, so the tip function, the tip adjust function, would still be available to you, because it's not really changing fundamentally, the financial component of the transaction. It's changing the process. Now, if you move towards a model where you have a Bluetooth-style device or a wireless-style device that you can bring to the table, then you actually can offer the consumer the ability to add the tip to the transaction before authorization, and then there would be no tip adjustment necessary. But if you still take the card back to wherever the workstation is that you're bringing up payment, or you walk up to the counter, pay at the counter kind of scenario, the ability to do a tip adjust after is still going to be available.
Okay. Another question, will the mag strip be eventually phased out, and if so, when?
Good question. In other countries that have been active with chip technology for 10 years or more, there's still mag stripes on their cards for the most part. I would never say never, but I don't see it happening in the near term, and I'll go out on a limb and say I think it'd be 10 years before the mag stripe would ever go away. Certainly nothing shy of 5 years. We haven't seen it happen overseas or up north of us. In Canada, they're about 92% rolled out in chip technology, and all their cards still have mag stripes. So it's by no means a near-term consideration. The mag stripes will still be there.
Okay. I think we can wrap up a little bit. We have a couple of questions that I think we still have some confusion on. One is, if we have a chip-enabled terminal, do we have to insert a chip card into the terminal, or can we still swipe the card?
Okay. The answer to that depends on if you have a chip-enabled terminal, and that means you have both the hardware that's capable of having a chip card inserted into the chip reader, excuse me, and you have the application that activates that chip reader. So you got to have both those scenarios. So if you have that, let's assume that you have a terminal that's got chip capabilities, both hardware-wise and software-wise, and then a chip card is presented for payment. You'll initially anyway, you're going to, just by habit, you're going to try to swipe it through the mag stripe reader. Well, there's a data element in the mag stripe of that card that's going to tell the terminal this is a chip card. And because the terminal is also a chip-capable terminal, the message is going to pop up on the screen, this card must be inserted into the chip slot to process this transaction. So you can't, it won't actually let you magstripe read the card unless after you've tried to insert it into the chip reader, but it can't get that chip read to occur. So you put it into the chip reader, something's wrong with the chip. Let's just say it's broken, it's cracked, something happened to it. And the device and the chip card can't talk to each other. After 3 attempts of doing that, where an attempt would be insert the card, have it error out, remove the card, insert the card, have it error out a second time, remove the card, insert the card, have it error out a third time, remove the card, then you can do what's known as magstripe fallback. And then at that point in time, the terminal will allow a magstripe transaction to occur. But the purpose for that is we move towards this newer, secure, more secure technology. We don't want people just to, by habit, keep doing magstripe processing. We want the chip function to occur.
Okay. A couple people have questions about whether or not an upgrade is necessary for them. One person says, what is the best solution for our service of business? We typically have only a few credit card transactions per month and offer credit card options as a service to clients. But they handwrite paper receipts and provide customers with copy, and then they call in the transaction via touch tone. What changes must they make and by when?
Well, again, there's no mandate. There's nothing out there that says you as a merchant have to take advantage of this technology. What the card brands are hoping is that you want to do this and that over time you will want to do this. Now, if you're 99% non-credit card or 99% card not present, remember that this does not apply to you. So again, when I go back to those considerations for you, think about what do you sell and how well do you know your customer. Do you know all of your customers because they are repeat buyers from you? The likelihood of them trying to defraud you is very small. If you don't know your customers and you get a bunch of one-time buyers, then you might want to upgrade and change the way you do business and actually have a card device that is available for running true chip transaction processing. It's really dependent on those. I mean, in my mind, those are the two big considerations you ought to think about. Okay. How do I sell, and who do I sell to?
Got it. Any final comments, Craig, before we dismiss?
No, I hope this helps. There's a lot of confusion, I know, in the market about what is this thing called EMV, and do I have to do something? And I think there's a lot of inconsistent information in the market. I think the things to keep in mind are it's your choice as a merchant when to take advantage of this. It applies to your card-present business only, so not your card-not-present, e-commerce, Moto, that kind of stuff. Recurring payments, if that's your model as well, doesn't apply to any of that. It's card-present only. And, I think it's really important to understand if this is something that you want to take advantage of, then you need to think about what's my best way to implement, right? And that's going to be a combination of how do I sell, what kind of point of sale do I use, and what's available to me now versus in 3 months versus in 6 months versus next year. All of that kind of comes into play on this. But keep in mind, there's nothing that's forcing you to do this. The associations have not said, merchants, you must do this. And if you don't do this, we're going to shut off your processing. That's not the case. You can still function under your current mode of operation. It's just a matter of whether or not you think there is a adverse financial risk to you as a merchant for taking no action. And that I guess, would be my final comments.
Thank you so much, Craig Teakin, for talking with us today about this very important topic. Thanks to all the attendees for participating today. Remember to visit nfib.com/webinars for all of our webinars on demand. That concludes our program for today. Thanks again. My name is Casey for the NFI.